The last memory Darnell Pruitt had of a normal life was a Tuesday evening in October, and it smelled like cornbread.
His daughter, Zola, was 4 years old. She had her mother's eyes, wide and dark and always halfway between a question and a laugh. And she had Darnell's stubbornness, which her kindergarten teacher described diplomatically as strong-willed, and which Darnell privately considered the greatest compliment anyone had ever given his child. She was sitting at the kitchen table in their apartment on Greer Avenue in East Raleigh, North Carolina, doing the kind of homework that 4-year-olds do, which mostly involved drawing pictures of what family looked like and labeling the people with large, uncertain letters.
Darnell was at the stove. He was 31 years old and built like the work he did. Wide through the shoulders, thick in the arms, hands that had spent 6 years pouring concrete and laying rebar and finishing floors for Cascade Building Group, the largest construction company in Wake County. He wasn't a man who moved through spaces quietly. He moved like someone who knew what buildings were made of from the inside, who understood the bones of things, who respected weight. Zola looked up from her drawing. "Daddy, how do you spell beautiful?" B-E-A-U-T-I-F-U-L. That's too many letters. That's how many beautiful takes. She went back to her drawing. He turned the cornbread down. The phone rang at 8:43. He answered. It was Keisha, Zola's mother, his ex. A woman he had loved for 5 years, before the relationship had slowly come apart, the way things come apart when two people stop being angry enough to fight and start being tired enough to let go. They had ended quietly, which is the hardest kind of ending. They co-parented Zola with the specific, careful coordination of people who know that the child is watching how adults behave when things don't work out. Keisha called to say she'd be late picking Zola up. Could Darnell take her overnight? No problem. He made up the couch with the blanket Zola liked, the one with the cartoon elephants, and Zola fell asleep in front of a Disney movie before 9. Darnell washed the dishes. He dried them. He watched his daughter sleep for a moment, the specific, still watching of a parent who understands that this is one of the good things, one of the genuinely good things, and wants to hold on to it. Then he turned off the light and went to bed. He never heard anything in the night. When the police came at 6:15 the following morning, there were 4 of them. The knock on the door wasn't a knock. It was the kind of sound that means they are not waiting for an answer. Darnell opened the door still in his sleep clothes. He saw the badges. He saw their faces. And before a single word was spoken, a cold dropped through him. The kind that starts in the chest and doesn't come from temperature.
"Darnell Pruitt?" "Yeah. We need you to step outside." "What happened? Where's my daughter?" 2 of them moved past him into the apartment without asking permission. He heard one of them say it before he fully understood what was being said. "She's gone, sir. Gone." The words sat there, completely still, not landing, just sitting at the edge of his understanding, waiting for him to let it in.
"Gone where?" he said. But they weren't answering questions. They were looking at him, the way cops look at someone when they have already decided what the answer is, and they're watching your face for confirmation. "Mr. Pruitt." The detective was a man named Cassidy, late 40s, heavy around the jaw, a face that had long since finished being surprised by anything. "Your daughter Zola was found unresponsive in the living room at approximately 5:47 this morning. Emergency services were unable to revive her. She was pronounced dead at 6:02. The apartment seemed to tilt. "She was sleeping," Darnell said. He heard his own voice from somewhere outside his body. "She was right there on the couch. She was sleeping when I went to bed." "We understand. We're going to need you to come with us." "What happened to her? What happened to my—" "Mr. Pruitt, please step outside." He stepped outside. And he didn't step back inside as a free man for 4 years. Before we go any deeper into Darnell's story, I need you to take 1 second right now. Hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, because I genuinely want to know how far these stories reach. We are American Truth Tales, and what I'm about to tell you is one of the most devastating and ultimately the most triumphant stories we have ever told. Stay with me.
The medical examiner's initial report listed the cause of death as undetermined, pending toxicology. That was the word they used in the beginning. Undetermined. It would have been enough, if left there, to at least hold the case open while the truth was found. But the truth wasn't what Raleigh County Detective Frank Cassidy was interested in finding. What Cassidy was interested in was closing. He had closed 31 cases in the prior 2 years, and his clearance rate was the highest in the department. And his clearance rate was the reason the department left him alone, and the reason nobody asked too many questions about how he got there. Frank Cassidy had not personally planted evidence. He had not fabricated test results. What he had done, what he always did, was find the most obvious person and build the story in that direction. Find the frame and fill it in. Not lying exactly, just narrowing, steering, choosing which facts to emphasize and which to let become footnotes. The most obvious person in Zola Pruitt's death was the last person to see her alive.
The toxicology report came back positive for diphenhydramine, the active ingredient in common over-the-counter sleep medication. A concentration that, in a child Zola's size and weight, could have been administered intentionally. Cassidy built the case on that word, administered. There was a bottle of children's allergy medication in Darnell's bathroom cabinet. Standard, the kind 3/4 of American households with small children keep in the house. Cassidy had it photographed, logged, labeled. He had a neighbor, an older woman named Mrs. Prudhomme, partly deaf, who had seen Darnell and Zola arguing in the parking lot 2 weeks earlier over whether Zola needed a jacket, a disagreement any parent recognizes. Describe it in her statement as him yelling at that poor little girl. Cassidy wove these things together, the way someone who has done this before knows how to weave them. By the time the DA's office received his report, the story had a shape. And the shape said, father, sedative, sleeping child, dead by morning. Darnell Pruitt was charged with second-degree murder. His public defender was a 29-year-old man named Owens, who had graduated from NC Central Law 2 years earlier, and who was genuinely trying, but who was carrying 63 active cases, and who had 12 minutes with Darnell before the arraignment. At trial, the prosecution told the story Cassidy had built with the confidence of people who believed it. Darnell's attorney argued the medication was common and the dosage was ambiguous, and the evidence of intent was circumstantial. He was right about all of it. The jury deliberated for 9 hours. They came back guilty. Darnell heard the word and felt the floor disappear beneath him. He turned to look at the gallery. Keisha was there, his ex, Zola's mother, and her face was something he would spend 4 years trying to unsee. Not hate, not grief, a specific broken vacancy, the look of someone whose world had ended twice in the same month and who had no more room left for emotion.
Her brother was there too, Devin, 28 years old, compact and coiled, a man who had never liked Darnell even when things were good between him and Keisha. Devin met Darnell's eyes across the courtroom as the verdict landed, and what lived in Devin's face was something colder and more deliberate than grief. It was satisfaction. Darnell was processed into Caldwell Correctional Institution on a Friday afternoon in February. He was given a number, a jumpsuit, and a bunk in a cell block that smelled like industrial cleaner and old concrete. He had never been inside a prison before. He had never been arrested before this. He was 31 years old. He had been convicted of killing his own child. And his daughter was dead. That was the part Darnell couldn't get past. Not the conviction. He knew what the conviction was worth, knew in his bones that it was wrong. And somewhere beneath the devastation, there was a cold, hard floor of certainty that he had not done this thing. But his daughter was gone. The cornbread and the drawing and the elephant blanket and the question about how to spell beautiful, all of it was the last page of something. And it was over. He told himself in those first weeks that it didn't matter anymore.
That there was nothing to fight for. That the fighting was the kind of thing that required believing something good was still possible. And he had no evidence of that. He was wrong. But he wouldn't know that for 2 more years. Caldwell Correctional had a warden named Eugene Bellows. Bellows was 58 years old. He had spent 22 years in the correctional system, the last 7 as warden at Caldwell, and he had developed over those years the specific institutional fatigue of a man who has seen too many people enter a system and watched what the system did to them. He was not soft. You did not survive 22 years in corrections by being soft. But he was honest in a way that the system didn't require, and that he had chosen to maintain anyway, at considerable personal cost.
Eugene Bellows had a son named Marcus, and he had a daughter named Dana who was alive and well and living in Charlotte, and he had a wife named Renata who called him every Sunday evening from Fayetteville, where they kept the house they'd bought in 1999 and where Bellows drove home on his Fridays off. And he had a grave. In Riverside Memorial Cemetery in Durham, beneath a red oak tree that lost its leaves early every year, there was a headstone that said Theodore James Bellows, 1988-2019, Teddy, 21 years old, pulled over on a county road outside Durham by a deputy who had a quota and a hair trigger and very little patience for a young black man whose registration sticker was 3 weeks expired. Theodore Bellows had not been violent, had not been threatening, had reached for his registration in the glove box the way his father had taught him, slowly, clearly, saying what he was doing before he did it, and the deputy had made a decision that no subsequent investigation, no department review, no civil settlement could undo. Eugene Bellows had sat in the front row of a courtroom in Durham County and watched a jury acquit the deputy in 40 minutes. He drove home that night and sat at the kitchen table until morning. Renata found him there, still in his court clothes, perfectly still. She sat beside him, and neither of them said anything until the sun came up. 3 months later, he went back to work. He told Renata that the only way he could make Theodore's death mean anything was to be inside the system and refuse to let it operate without conscience wherever his reach extended. Renata told him he was going to destroy himself that way. He told her he was going to try anyway. Darnell Pruitt arrived at Caldwell on a Friday afternoon and was assigned to Block C, which was Bellows' rotation for weekly welfare checks. Bellows did them personally, not because protocol required it, but because he'd learned early that the first 30 days were when men either found their footing or lost it entirely. He stopped at Darnell's cell on the 9th day. Darnell was sitting on his bunk, not reading, not sleeping, just sitting with the particular stillness of a man who has run out of ways to process what has happened to him and is simply waiting for time to move. Bellows looked at him. He had looked at a lot of men in a lot of cells. He had learned to read them the way you read terrain, where the danger was, where the grief was, where the anger was, what was real and what was performance. What he saw in Darnell Pruitt's face was not the face of a man who had killed his child. He knew that didn't mean anything. He wasn't naive enough to believe he could read guilt or innocence in a face. Men who had done terrible things could look precisely like this, hollowed out, bewildered, present and absent at the same time. Innocence and devastation produced the same face. But something made him stop. He stopped at the cell for longer than the routine required. He asked Darnell one question. "You eat today?" Darnell looked up at him. A long pause. "No. I'll have something sent." He walked on. That was all. But he came back the following week and the week after. Not for any professional reason, not because protocol required it, because Theodore Bellows had been 21 years old and had sat in a car on a county road and followed every rule he'd been taught, and it hadn't been enough. And something about this man sitting in this cell reminded Bellows of that fact in a way he couldn't walk away from. Over months they talked, not deeply, not at first, about work, about construction. Bellows had built an addition to his house in Fayetteville himself one summer in the late 90s, and he knew enough about what Darnell did to ask real questions and get real answers. Gradually, the way trust builds in closed environments, slowly and with great cost, Darnell told him about Zola, about the night, about what he remembered and what he didn't.
Bellows listened. He did not say, "I believe you." He had learned not to say that. What he said was, "Tell me everything you do remember. Start from the cornbread." Darnell told him everything. The phone call from Keisha, the elephant blanket, the Disney movie, putting Zola to sleep, washing the dishes, going to bed, hearing nothing. Then he told Bellows one more thing, something he hadn't told his attorney because his attorney had 12 minutes. 3 weeks before Zola died, Darnell had gotten into a disagreement with Devin, Keisha's brother, over money. Devin had borrowed $800 from Darnell the previous summer for reasons Devin had never specified, and Devin had not repaid it. When Darnell pressed him, Devin had become angry, the specific, disproportionate anger of someone who has a different reason for being angry than the one they're showing. He had said things. One of them had been, "You better watch yourself, Darnell. You better watch what you've got." Darnell had not thought much of it then. Arguments like this one had a certain texture, loud, brief, forgotten in a week. He had not connected it to what happened to Zola. He had not, in the fog of grief and arrest and trial, thought to connect it to anything. Bellows connected it. He didn't say so immediately. He sat with it. He turned it slowly, the way you turn a thing when you need to see all its surfaces before you know what you're dealing with. And then, on a Tuesday evening in October, exactly 2 years after the night Darnell's daughter fell asleep to a Disney movie, Bellows came back to Block C with something in his hand. A name and an address. "I'm going to tell you something, and I'm going to tell you that I'm not doing this. I'm not involved. I have a job to protect. But you have an appeal pending, and you need a better reason for it than circumstantial doubt." He set the paper on the ledge of the cell door. "That's Devin Reeves' current address. And there's a woman named Carla Simmons. She's a paralegal at a nonprofit legal clinic in Durham called the Eastgate Justice Project. She's taken 2 wrongful conviction cases in the last 18 months and won them both. She answers her email." He walked away. He did not look back. He never mentioned it again. 26 months after Darnell entered Coldwell Correctional, a woman named Carla Simmons drove to the prison on a Wednesday morning in a 12-year-old Honda Civic with a busted passenger side mirror, carrying a legal pad and a thermos of coffee. She was 44 years old.
She had not been a lawyer. She was a paralegal, which meant she had done the bone work of the legal profession for 20 years without the credential. And she knew more about wrongful conviction procedure than most attorneys who held the degree. She had worked at 3 firms and 2 nonprofits, and she had seen enough men walk out of courtrooms toward cells that should have been walking toward doors to make her angry in a way that had not diminished in 20 years. Productive anger, she called it. The kind you didn't have to manage, the kind you just aimed. She had received Darnell's email 3 weeks earlier. It was 5 paragraphs long and written with the careful, measured tone of a man who had learned that emotion worked against him in formal settings and who had disciplined himself accordingly. He laid out the case plainly: the night, the medication, the investigator, the verdict, the appeal denial, and at the end, one sentence that had lodged in Carla's mind like a splinter. "I don't know who else to ask. I just need someone who will look at it without having already decided." She looked at it. She read the case file Gerald had managed to compile. She read the toxicology report twice, specifically the section on diphenhydramine concentration and the standard dosage range for a child Zola's age and weight. And she found something that Darnell's original attorney had not found, or had not known to look for, or had not had time to look for because he was carrying 63 cases. The concentration in Zola's bloodstream was consistent with therapeutic dosing, not overdose, not deliberate administration of a harmful quantity, consistent with a parent giving a child the recommended amount of children's allergy medication for congestion, which was in fact what Darnell had done 2 days before that night, when Zola had come to his apartment with a runny nose. The medication hadn't killed Zola, which meant either the medical examiner's conclusion was wrong, or Zola had died of something else, or Zola wasn't dead. Carla sat with that thought for a long time before she allowed herself to think it completely, because it was the kind of thought that once you had it, reorganized everything. And she had learned over 20 years that reorganizing everything was how you got to the truth, and also how you got destroyed if you were wrong.
She began requesting records, not asking, requesting, formally, with filing numbers and response deadlines and a specific language of someone who knows exactly which documents the state is required to produce. What she received 3 weeks later, after 2 refusals that she appealed and won, was the original emergency services report from the morning Zola was found, the EMT report, the responding officer's body camera transcript. And she found a discrepancy. The EMT report noted that the child was unresponsive but had a pulse at the time of first contact. A pulse. Weak, irregular, but present. The narrative in the police report, the one Cassidy had filed, the one that became the cornerstone of the prosecution, described the child as found deceased, past tense, already gone. These 2 documents described the same moment in the same apartment, 8 minutes apart. They did not describe the same child. Carla drove to Caldwell on that Wednesday morning and sat across from Darnell in the visitation room, a room that smelled like old coffee and the specific anxious warmth of too many people with too much at stake, and she put both documents on the table between them. "I need you to read these," she said. "Take your time." Darnell read them. She watched his face. She had gotten good at watching faces across visitation room tables, and she knew exactly what she was looking for. He looked up. His eyes were completely still. "She had a pulse," he said. "Yes." "They said she was dead." "The EMT who was first on scene says she was alive when he got there." The silence between them was the specific quality of a silence in which a man is trying to hold together while something enormous is occurring inside him. "Where is she?" Darnell said. His voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't know yet," Carla said, "but I know she wasn't dead, and I know someone decided to say she was."
Carla Simmons was not supposed to investigate Devin Reeves. That was not in her role. She was a paralegal at a nonprofit legal clinic, and her role was case documentation and court filings and the mountain of procedural work that kept wrongful conviction appeals from collapsing under their own paperwork. She was not a private investigator. She did not have a license for the kind of work she was about to do. She did it anyway. Devin Reeves, age 32, lived in an apartment complex in Garner, a suburb south of Raleigh, and worked as a dispatcher at a regional logistics company. He drove a 3-year-old Dodge Charger that he could not afford on a dispatcher's salary. He had 2 credit cards showing recent large payments, not debt payments, purchases, a gaming system, new tires, a weekend in Myrtle Beach in August that his social media documented thoroughly. Devin Reeves was spending money he shouldn't have had. Carla found this through the specific combination of public records, social media forensics, and the kind of careful inference that any determined person with a spreadsheet and enough time can assemble without a license. It told her nothing definitive. Lots of people spent money they shouldn't have. It didn't make them complicit in the staged death and disappearance of a girl, but it made her look harder. She found the connection through a property record, a rental property in Garner, a single-family home on Birchwood Lane, registered to an LLC called Reeves Wance Holdings. The second name was new. She ran it. Sandra Wance, 41 years old, a licensed practical nurse formerly employed at Wake County Medical Center, terminated 3 years ago following an internal investigation into medication documentation discrepancies. The investigation had found no criminal wrongdoing, but it had found systematic anomalies in how certain sedative medications were logged. A nurse with a history of sedation medication issues, connected to Devin Reeves through shared property, connected to Devin Reeves through, Carla found this in a Facebook photo from 6 years earlier, deep in Devin's archived posts, a relationship. They had been together. There were photos of them at a cookout at someone's birthday, Sandra Wance standing beside Devin with her arm through his. Carla leaned back from her laptop and pressed her face against her hands. It was the medication. That was how they'd done it. Sandra Wance had the knowledge and access history. Devin had the motive, the money Devin owed Darnell, the warning he'd issued, the desire to destroy a man he never respected and who his sister had chosen over him. And between them, they had built a mechanism to take Zola and make Darnell pay for her disappearance with his freedom. But where was Zola? The property on Birchwood Lane was a start. Carla did not go there herself. She was not reckless. She contacted someone she trusted, a former investigator named Raymond Greer, who had worked cold cases for the Wake County Sheriff's Office before retiring, and who now did consulting work for legal clinics. Raymond was 61 years old, methodical, and deeply skeptical of everything, including his own conclusions. She told him what she had. He listened without interrupting. "It's circumstantial," he said. "All of it is," she said, "but it's consistent. You think the girl is alive." "I think she was alive the morning they took her. I think someone sedated her enough to make first responders uncertain. I think Cassidy wasn't uncertain. I think Cassidy was told what to say. And I think Devin had money to move after this happened, and I want to know where it came from." Raymond was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Give me 72 hours. Raymond Greer came back in 48 hours, not 72, because what he found in the first 48 hours made him move faster. Devin Reeves had received 3 wire transfers in the 14 months following Zola's disappearance. They came from a holding account that Raymond traced through 2 layers of shell structure to a man named Philip Ostroff, a name that meant nothing to Carla until Raymond explained who Philip Ostroff was. Philip Ostroff was a former business partner of Detective Frank Cassidy's brother-in-law. He had been investigated twice for financial fraud, never charged. He ran a property management company in Clayton, a small city east of Raleigh. Raymond's theory: Cassidy hadn't just been negligent. Cassidy had been paid. The fraud ring, if that's what it was, had needed Darnell out of the way for reasons that had nothing to do with Zola and everything to do with a property dispute involving land in East Raleigh that Darnell's family had owned for 3 generations. Land that was in the path of a development. Land that would be significantly easier to acquire if the title holder was in prison on a murder conviction. It was a clean theory. It explained the money. It explained Cassidy's speed and certainty. It gave Devin a connection to a larger operation rather than just a personal vendetta. Carla brought this to Darnell on her next visit. Darnell listened without speaking. Then he said, "So they did this for land." "We think Cassidy's involvement was about the land. Devin's motive may have been separate. They may have found each other through Sandra Vance." "Where is Zola?" "We don't know yet." "Is she alive?" Carla looked at him steadily. "We believe so. We believe she's been placed somewhere. Birchwood Lane is a starting point, but Raymond doesn't think she's been there recently." Darnell nodded slowly, the specific nod of a man who is processing information that is simultaneously the best and the worst thing he has ever heard, because probably alive was infinitely better than dead, and infinitely more agonizing because it meant his daughter had been somewhere without him for over 2 years. "I need to get out," he said. "I know. I'm filing for emergency habeas review based on the EMT discrepancy. I'm also filing a misconduct complaint with Cassidy with the State Criminal Investigation Office. But, Darnell, this takes time. She's 8 now, every day." "I know." Carla held his gaze. "I know. I'm moving as fast as I can without making a mistake that lets them close the door on us." For the next 3 weeks, Carla and Raymond followed the Ostroff thread, carefully, methodically, building a documented record of the financial connections. They were 3 weeks into that work when Raymond called at 6 in the morning. "The Ostroff lead is real, but it's not where Zola is. I went out to Birchwood Lane yesterday. Neighbors haven't seen Devin or Sandra in 4 months." They moved. They moved. "And here's what I found when I went deeper into Sandra Vance." He paused. "Sandra has a sister, Angela Vance, 44, lives in Wilmington. Angela Vance has a daughter registered in the Wilmington Unified School District, enrolled 14 months ago. Age reported at enrollment, 7. Name listed, Zoe Vance." The line was silent. "Zola," Carla said. "Zoe, close enough that the child would answer to it, different enough to survive a database search." Before we get to what happened next, I need you right here with me, because this is the part of the story where everything narrows down to one question: is she there? And I need you to understand what Darnell is feeling in this moment. 4 years gone, a daughter he's been told is dead, and now a name on a school enrollment form in Wilmington. If you were Carla, holding that information, what do you do first? Call the police? Go yourself? Tell Darnell? Share your thoughts in the comments right now. This is the moment. Raymond Greer did not go to the Wilmington Police Department. Not first. He had learned over 30 years in law enforcement and post-law enforcement that police departments were not monolithic institutions with unified interests in the truth. They were collections of individuals with individual loyalties, individual histories, and individual reasons to behave in ways that might not align with what was right. What he knew about this case, the Cassidy connection, the Raleigh PD history, the way the prosecution had moved, told him that involving law enforcement without knowing exactly who he was involving was how you got Zola moved again, or worse. Instead, he drove to Wilmington himself on a Thursday morning and parked across the street from Pinecrest Elementary School at 7:45, 45 minutes before the first bell. He sat in his car and he waited. At 8:23, a silver minivan pulled into the drop-off line. A woman got out, mid-40s, light complexion, dark hair pulled back. She went to the side door of the van and opened it. A girl got out. Raymond Greer had studied photographs of Zola Pruitt that were now 2 years old. He had studied them with the methodical attention of someone who knows that memory shifts and faces change, and certainty is a luxury you cannot afford when the stakes are this high. But the girl who stepped out of that silver minivan and swung her backpack over her shoulders and said something to the woman that made them both laugh had Darnell Pruitt's birth. She had a way of tilting her head slightly to the left when she listened, and on her left forearm, partially visible below her sleeve, was a birthmark, small, irregular, the shape of something spilled. Raymond had that birthmark documented in the original case file. It was not a public detail. It had never been published in any news coverage of the case. He photographed the girl from distance. He photographed the woman. He photographed the minivan and its license plate. Then he drove back to Raleigh without stopping. That evening, he sat across from Carla Simmons in her office at the Eastgate Justice Project and placed 3 photographs on her desk. Carla looked at them for a long time. "That's her," she said, not a question. "I believe so." "How sure are you?" "Sure enough to act, not sure enough to make a mistake." They made a decision that night. Not the police, not yet. Not until they controlled who knew what and could protect what they were bringing to light. They called an attorney, a real attorney, a licensed one, a woman named Patricia O'Coffer, who had handled civil rights litigation for 14 years and who had been following the Pruitt case from a distance because it had the profile of a case she might someday need to step into. Patricia answered her phone. She listened to everything. She asked 4 questions, each one more precise than the last. Then she said, "I'm going to need those photos, the EMT report, the financial records, and the school enrollment documentation on my desk by 7 tomorrow morning. And I'm going to need you to not contact any Raleigh law enforcement until I've made 2 calls." "Who are you calling?" Carla asked. "The State Bureau of Investigation," Patricia said, "because what you're describing is not just a wrongful conviction, it's a kidnapping, and kidnapping is federal. And federal means we bypass Raleigh PD entirely." What happened in the next 11 days moved at 2 completely different speeds simultaneously. Publicly, nothing moved. Darnell sat in Caldwell. He didn't know about Wilmington yet. Carla had made the decision not to tell him, not because she didn't trust him, but because she had seen what hope did to people in cells when the hope didn't deliver. And she wasn't going to put Darnell through that until the thing was solid enough to stand on. Privately, everything moved. The State Bureau of Investigation opened a formal inquiry into the Pruitt conviction within 4 days of Patricia's call. The agent assigned was a woman named Dana Bellows, which was, in a detail that would only reveal its meaning later, the daughter of Eugene Bellows, warden of Caldwell Correctional. Dana Bellows was 34 years old, 8 years in the SBI, and she had grown up watching her father go to work every day inside a system he refused to let operate without conscience. She had gone into law enforcement for the same reason he had stayed in corrections. She had her father's eyes and her father's stubbornness, and the specific tirelessness of someone who has grown up understanding that the alternative to fighting is allowing. She pulled the Cassidy financial records within 48 hours of receiving the case. She found the Ostroff connection in 60 hours. She ran Philip Ostroff through federal financial monitoring and found 2 wire transfers that had not appeared in the records Raymond had accessed, which meant Raymond's records were incomplete, and the actual sum paid to Devin Reeves was considerably larger than anyone had known. She went to Wilmington with 2 federal agents and a child welfare specialist on a Tuesday morning. The silver minivan was in the driveway of a house on Meridian Court when they arrived at 7:15. Angela Vance opened the door in her bathrobe and took 3 seconds to understand what was happening before her knees went soft and she grabbed the doorframe. They found the girl in the kitchen. She was eating cereal. She was wearing a school uniform. She had her backpack on the chair beside her, already packed, already ready. She looked up when the agents came in. She was not frightened immediately. She was the kind of child who assessed new adults with quick, serious eyes before deciding what to feel about them, the way her father assessed buildings from the outside before deciding how to enter them. The child welfare specialist crouched down to eye level. "Hi," she said. "What's your name?" The girl looked at her for a long time. Then she said something that she had clearly been told to say, the practiced answer of a child who has been coached, who has heard the name so many times it has almost replaced the one she was born with. "Zoe," she said. But her eyes were moving, taking inventory, and something in the way the specialist crouched down, something in the gentleness of it, the specific care of it, made the girl's face shift. "Zoe," she said again, then quieter, uncertain. "That's what they call me." "What did they call you before?" the specialist said softly. The longest pause. The kitchen clock ticked. The cereal got soggy. "Zola," the girl said. Eugene Bellows came to Block C himself. Not a guard, not a counselor. The warden walked to Darnell Pruitt's cell on a Wednesday morning at 8:47 and stood in front of it and waited for Darnell to look up. Darnell looked up. He saw Bellows' face, and because he had spent 2 years learning to read this man's face across distances and silences, he knew immediately that something had happened. He stood up from the bunk. "What?" he said. One word, all the air in his lungs behind it. Bellows said, "She's alive, Darnell." The sound Darnell Pruitt made was not a word. It was not a cry. It was the sound a man makes when something that has been pressing against his chest for 4 years releases all at once, the specific involuntary sound of an enormous weight being relieved, the body's own involuntary acknowledgement that it has been carrying something nearly impossible and has just been relieved of it. He put both hands against the wall. He stood there with his forehead against the concrete. His shoulders moved. He did not speak for a long time. Bellows stood outside the cell and waited. He was not going to rush this. He was not going to insert himself into it. He had learned in 22 years that some moments belong entirely to the person inside them, and the only respectful thing to do is stay present without demand. When Darnell finally turned around, his eyes were red, and his face was the face of someone who is trying to hold together because the holding together is necessary and the falling apart can happen later. "Where is she?" "She's in Wilmington. She's safe. She's with Child Welfare Services right now. She's healthy." Darnell's jaw worked. "Does she remember me?" "I don't know yet. She's 8 years old. She was taken when she was 4. A pause. But she remembered her name. Something moved through Darnell's face at that. Her name? When they asked her what her name was, what it was before, she said Zola. He closed his eyes. He kept them closed for a long time. I want to pause right here, because I want you to feel what Darnell is feeling in this cell right now. 4 years. His daughter remembers her name. And the man standing outside the bars telling him this is the warden, the same man who quietly pointed him toward the one person who could help him, without ever saying he was doing it. I want you to drop a comment telling me what part of this story has hit you the hardest so far. I mean it. I read every single one, and this community is why we keep going. The weeks between Zola's discovery and Darnell's exoneration hearing were weeks that moved slowly in the feeling and fast in the machinery. Patricia Okafor filed for emergency habeas corpus relief in Wake County Superior Court, supported by 3 primary evidentiary pillars: the EMT report establishing Zola's pulse at the time of first contact, the financial records establishing payments from Philip Ostroff through Devin Reeves connected to Detective Cassidy, and the SBI's forensic confirmation that Zola Pruitt, now confirmed by DNA comparison through the state lab, was alive and currently in state protective custody in New Hanover County. Cassidy was placed on administrative leave within 48 hours of the SBI's formal report reaching the DA's office. He retained a private attorney. He did not comment publicly. Sandra Vance was arrested the same afternoon at a Walgreens in Cary where she'd been working for 7 months. She did not remain calm. She told the arresting officers something they noted in their report. She said that Devin had told her Zola would only be moved once, that she'd be placed with Angela and that would be the end of it, that nobody would look because the father was in prison and the mother believed her daughter was dead. What Sandra Vance had not been told, what Devin had never told her, was that he had sold information about the land to Philip Ostroff's network, that Cassidy had been a piece of a larger arrangement, that the whole structure had been built on the specific assumption that a black man in a North Carolina courtroom charged with killing his own child had no chance. Philip Ostroff was arrested the following Monday by federal agents at his home in Clayton. He was facing charges that included conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, evidence tampering, and kidnapping. His attorney entered a not guilty plea. His financial records, which federal prosecutors subpoenaed in full, would eventually document a fraud network reaching across 4 counties and involving 7 individuals. 3 of them were law enforcement. Angela Vance, who had raised Zola, who had enrolled her in school and made her lunches and called her Zoe, and who Zola, when asked, described as nice to me, she was always nice to me, cooperated fully with investigators. She had believed when Devin and Sandra brought her the girl that Zola had been removed from an abusive home. She had believed this for 4 years. When the agents explained what had actually happened, she sat in the kitchen of her Wilmington home and cried for a long time. The child welfare specialist noted that Zola, who was in the next room being interviewed separately, heard Angela crying and called out to ask if she was okay. That detail appeared in Patricia Okafor's briefing materials, and she made sure it reached the judge. Because it was important. Because what it said about Zola, about who Zola was, about what she had managed to preserve of herself across 4 years and a stolen name and a world that had been arranged to make her forget, was the truest thing in the entire case. She had taken care of people around her. She had looked out for others. She had, even at 8 years old, in a house that wasn't hers, with a name that wasn't hers, maintained the specific quality her father had seen her, the stubbornness that looked like strength, the attention that looked like love. She was her father's daughter. They had not been able to take that. Wake County Superior Court, Courtroom 7, a Thursday morning in March. The hearing was technically a motion proceeding, an emergency habeas review, not a trial, which meant there was no jury, just a judge, just the lawyers, just the evidence, laid out precisely and completely in front of a woman named the Honorable Sandra Whitmore, who had been on the Wake County bench for 11 years and who had a reputation for 2 things: impatience with theatrics and absolute, exacting attention to facts. Darnell sat at the defendant's table in a gray suit that Bellows had arranged, not prison clothes, because Bellows had decided that Darnell Pruitt was going to be seen that morning as a man, not a prisoner. He sat with his hands folded on the table and his back straight in the posture of someone who has decided that the only way through the next hour is through it. Patricia Okafor presented the evidence in exactly the order she had planned. Not the most dramatic order, not the most emotional order, but the most logically irrefutable order. EMT report first, then the financial chain, then the SBI findings, Then the DNA confirmation from the state lab. Zola Pruitt, alive, in state custody, confirmed match to maternal and paternal DNA samples. She set the DNA report on the table in front of her. "Your Honor," she said, "the state has convicted Darnell Pruitt of murdering a child who is alive. The child is not a metaphor. She is not a legal concept. She is a real, living, 8-year-old girl who is currently in protective custody in Wilmington. Her name is Zola. Her father has been incarcerated for 4 years and 2 months for her death." A pause. Her death did not occur. It was fabricated by a detective who was paid by individuals with a financial interest in removing Mr. Pruitt from his family's property, and by a system that was prepared to believe the worst about him because the worst was the most convenient story. The courtroom was completely quiet. Judge Whitmore looked at the documents. She asked 3 questions. Each one was answered directly and with documentation. Then she looked up. "Mr. Pruitt," she said, "please stand." Darnell stood. "I have reviewed the materials presented in this proceeding. I find that the conviction entered against you on February 14th, 4 years ago, was obtained through evidence that was materially compromised, and that the primary factual basis for the prosecution, the death of Zola Pruitt, is contradicted by forensic evidence that she is alive, 8 years old." She looked at him, not at the lawyers, at him. "Mr. Pruitt, this court vacates your conviction in its entirety. You are to be released from custody effective immediately. All records of this conviction are to be sealed pending expungement proceedings, which I am ordering to proceed on an expedited basis." She set her pen down. "I'm sorry," she said, "for what this system did to you." The room exhaled. Patricia put her hand on Darnell. He stood completely still. He was free. He was free and his daughter was alive, and the enormity of those 2 facts existing simultaneously inside a single human body was something the courtroom could see in the way he stood. Very still, very straight. The posture of a man who needs a moment before anything else can happen. The child welfare facility where Zola had been placed was a low building in Raleigh, painted pale yellow, with a garden in the front and a play structure visible through a chain-link gate in the back. Darnell arrived in the afternoon. Patricia was with him. Carla Simmons was with him. And standing just inside the entrance, in a personal capacity and not an official one, was Eugene Bellows, wearing civilian clothes, a jacket Darnell had never seen before, standing with his hands in his pockets and his face carrying the specific expression of someone who has done the one good thing they came to do and is now simply glad to be present for what follows. The facility coordinator led them down a hallway. At the end of the hallway was a room with a window. Through the window, a common area. Round tables, plastic chairs, a bookshelf on the far wall, a mural of something bright and wide painted across the back. And at one of the tables, bent over what appeared to be a drawing, was a girl. 8 years old, wide shoulders for her age, her hair in 2 braids, a pencil moving across paper with total focus. Darnell stopped, walking. He stood in the hallway with his hand on the wall, and he looked at his daughter through the glass, and he took a breath that seemed to last a very long time. The coordinator asked if he was ready. He didn't answer immediately. He was looking at the drawing his daughter was making, the specific total focus of it, the way her whole body organized itself around the pencil and the page. He was memorizing it, the way she sat, the angle of her head, the way she existed in a room, complete and specific and irreplaceable. "Yeah," he said, "I'm ready." The coordinator opened the door. The girl at the table looked up. She saw a man standing in the doorway, and she tilted her head slightly to the left, the way she always did when she was assessing something, the way her father assesses buildings from the outside before deciding how to enter them, and something moved across her face. Not immediate recognition, not a movie moment, clean and instantaneous, something more honest than that. Something that moved slowly from the eyes downward, arriving in stages, the way memory arrives when it has been buried under 4 years of a different name and a different house and a different world. She looked at him. He looked at her. "Hi, baby girl," Darnell said. His voice barely made it to the end of the sentence. Zola stood up from the table. Her drawing fell to the floor. She stood there for one moment, one still, specific, unrepeatable moment in which a child is deciding whether the thing she is seeing is the thing she thinks it is. And then she crossed the room. She crossed it fast, the way 6-year-olds move when they've decided something, all the weight of an 8-year-old body aimed at one direction. And she hit her father at full speed, and he went down to his knees with the impact and held on. He held on. He pressed his face into the side of her head, and he held on to his daughter in a child welfare facility in Raleigh, North Carolina, on a Thursday afternoon in March. And the sound he made was the sound a man makes when the thing he thought was gone turns out to still exist. Not relief exactly, not just grief releasing, but something the human body doesn't have a common word for, the specific overwhelm of a love that has survived 4 years of being told it had nowhere left to go. Zola held on too. She said one word, muffled against his shoulder. "Daddy." Just that, just the word, the most ordinary word in the world and the most extraordinary thing in that room. In the hallway through the window, Patricia Afaker pressed her fist against her mouth. Carla Simmons was not trying to hold it together. Eugene Bellows stood at the back of the hallway and looked at the ceiling for a moment, just a moment, and then looked back at the window. He thought about Theodore. He thought about the fact that Theodore was never coming back and that there was no window he could stand out, no hallway he could walk down, no door that would open onto a room where his son was bent over a drawing waiting to look up. He thought about all of that, and then he set it down, gently, the way he had learned to set it down, not away from him, but beside him, where it would always be, and he watched a man hold his daughter. That was enough. It was more than enough. It was, in fact, exactly what he had stayed in the system for. In the months that followed, things moved the way things move when a machine that was working wrong begins to be corrected. Devin Reeves was convicted on charges of kidnapping, conspiracy to commit fraud, and obstruction of justice. He received 19 years. Sandra Vance pleaded guilty to her role in the sedation and received 12 years. Philip Ostroff's federal trial resulted in a conviction on racketeering charges. His sentencing included restitution to the Pruitt family for the 4 years Darnell had lost. The land on Greer Avenue, the 3-generation family property that the entire structure had been built to acquire, remained with Darnell. Frank Cassidy was indicted on 3 counts of evidence tampering and 1 count of conspiracy to obstruct justice. He resigned from the Raleigh PD before the indictment landed. His trial was pending at the time this story was completed. The Eastgate Justice Project, where Carla Simmons worked, where Darnell's email had arrived on a weekday afternoon and been read by a woman who chose to look without having already decided, received a significant funding increase from a civil settlement that Patricia O'Coffer secured on Darnell's behalf against Wake County. The clinic used a portion of it to hire 2 additional staff members. One of them was a paralegal. Another was a formerly incarcerated man who knew what it felt like to send an email to a stranger and not know if it would be answered. Darnell went back to work. Not immediately. He gave himself months, because he earned those months and because Zola needed them too. But when he went back to Cascade Building Group, to the foreman who had written him a character reference that the prosecution had suppressed, who had kept Darnell's tools in a storage unit for 4 years in a specific irrational hope that they'd be needed again. They were needed again. Zola started 3rd grade at a school in East Raleigh 5 months after she came home. She had a teacher who understood that the adjustment was complex and handled it with care. She had a grandmother, Darnell's mother, Irene, a small, fierce woman who had spent 4 years telling anyone who would listen that her son was innocent and now had her granddaughter sitting at her kitchen table on Sunday afternoons. Keisha, Zola's mother, had spent 4 years in her own particular grief, having believed both that her daughter was dead and that the man she'd co-parented with had killed her. The process of unraveling those 4 years was not simple and not clean. She and Darnell found a way back to the careful, coordinated co-parenting they had practiced before, not easily, not without significant rupture, but with the specific determination of 2 people who understood that the child watching them was still watching. And Eugene Bellows retired 6 months after Darnell's exoneration. He and Renata drove to Riverside Memorial Cemetery the day after his last shift. They sat in folding chairs beside Theodore's grave, and Renata held his hand, and they sat there until the light changed. He told her what he'd done, the name and address, the paralegal at the clinic, the small, carefully deniable act that had started everything. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, "Teddy would have liked knowing you did that." Bellows nodded. He sat with that for a long time. He drove home to Fayetteville. He did not stop doing the work. He just did it from a different address. Darnell Pruitt did not lose his daughter. She was taken from him, taken deliberately by people who counted on a system to do their work for them, and a jury to believe the worst, and a world to forget a black man and his child as soon as the door closed. They were almost right. They got the jury, they got the door, they got 4 years. What they didn't get was Zola. Before I let you go, I have to say this directly to you. If you made it here, all the way to the end of Darnell and Zola's story, thank you, genuinely. Stories like this one take everything we have to build and tell, and they only matter because someone like you is on the other end actually listening. So thank you for watching. Thank you for staying. We are American Truth Tales. We tell these stories because Darnell Pruitt is real. Not this name, not this city, but this story. A black man, a system that decided what the answer was before it looked for the truth. A daughter taken, a father fighting from inside a cell with nothing but an email and the specific, unbreakable certainty of a man who knows what he did and did not do. These stories are happening. They are happening right now. And the only weapon against them is people who refuse to look away. Hit the like button right now before you scroll. 1 second. It tells us to keep going. Subscribe to American Truth Tales. We are here every single week with the stories that don't make the front page but absolutely should. The ones about ordinary people and the extraordinary things that happen when a system fails them and they refuse to accept it. Leave a comment. Tell me which moment broke you open in this story. Was it the cornbread, the elephant blanket, Bellows standing at the window, Zola crossing the room? I want to know. Every comment gets read. Every single one.